So we are recording the session. We also have live captions thanks to our lovely friends at MyClearText, so thank you to them. You can turn the captions on. There's a caption section that should be in your control panel at the bottom, or if you're on mobile or you've made it smaller, you might see the 3 dots for more functions and it'll be within there. So please do turn those on if you would like. My co-presenter today, Tom Pakinko, our Research Director. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi there. Can everybody hear me? I assume so. Great. Hello, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Research Director at Open, and I have the enviable position of reporting on also all manners of amazing research, user research that we do with our panel here at Open Inclusion. So very nice to meet you all, and I look forward to summarizing the final of our 3 sessions here about the diary study.
And just one quick note about today too. You'll note that as we're going through the presentation today, there's quite a lot of detail on it, and in fact, way more than we could probably cover off within the short time we've got. Please don't worry about the fact that we won't touch on all of it. We will provide a link to the presentation after, as we have to the last 2, and you can go through it at your own leisure. So it's really just so that if anyone comes to the presentation without having us go through it, that they had a little bit more detail there as well. Right, on to the show. So Open Inclusion, for anyone who doesn't know us well, we're an inclusive design, innovation and insight organisation based in London but operating across the UK. And what we really do is work with organisations to help them understand where are the barriers or the points of friction that either customers or staff may be finding as a result of their disabilities, age-related needs or any other access needs. So just understanding where those difficulties arise and then helping them design out those barriers so that it's a great customer experience for everyone, or an employees are given the greatest capability and opportunity to thrive. In terms of what we're sharing today, really the last piece of research, so this final 2 weeks that people have shared with us, and Tom will talk to you in a moment about who's been involved in our cohort. What's been changing over this period of time? What did this last 2 weeks feel like for them? And 2 particular themes, and the themes today are work and leisure and entertainment, so really important themes. Then we'll look a bit about the changes over the lockdown period itself, and particularly how this last 2 weeks, as the government restrictions were beginning to come off, how that last 2 weeks and people looking to the future was beginning to play out. And then we'd love to give you a chance for some questions and answers at the end. On to the show, Tom. Sorry, Tom, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Apologies. Hi, thanks, Christine. Yeah, great. So these are our research goals, and apologies, for those of you who have taken part in the previous 2 sessions, this will look rather familiar. But essentially, we're really interested in change, challenges, and adaptations faced by people with a wide range of access needs or just getting older. Specifically, so those are the challenges that are there, but also what are the opportunities that these challenges present? And that's really at the focus of this diary study that we're conducting. Next slide. Sorry, I think there's a lag. I can't quite see the slides changing. So, oh, there we go. So, okay, great. So for this, we do live in extraordinary times. Obviously, we're at the cusp of something quite historical with the coronavirus lockdown. And again, we wanted to get these incredible insights from our panel members. So we started the diary study in April. We had 13 participants. Since then, 1 has left for health reasons. So we're down to 12. And it was really across the 6 weeks that we've been gathering insights. And in a moment, I'll share with you the 6 themes of each week that we've been doing. So if we want to go to the next one. here are the themes of the week, and we've covered off all but two now. So we looked at communication. So how are communication styles changing? How are people adapting to obviously lockdown and different communication needs? Same goes for food and basics, just essentials. What is delivery like? What are people doing around different strategies to making food at home, etc. Then health and fitness, obviously a very timely and important theme in the current context. This also includes mental health. So how do people feel about lockdown and how are their emotions and really mental health sort of being affected or not affected by this ongoing lockdown. Then we've looked at finances on the personal finance side of things. How are people coping? What kind of stresses, anxieties, or otherwise do they have around finances? And then this week, we are presenting our findings on work and leisure. So the two sort of polar ends of the spectrum in a way. But we do have obviously some big changes in work happening. We actually have had 2 people furloughed in our group of 13/12. And also most are self-employed. So there's going to be some interesting findings that Christine will share with you today on work. And then I'll have the pleasure of kicking back and relaxing and sharing with you all about leisure and entertainment. There we go. So here's our demographic spread. Really, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide. Again, it'll be familiar to many of you. Just to say that I feel, and I think we both feel quite confident, we've had a pretty good range of ages, access needs, and various disabilities and approaches to adaptation. And this also includes assistive technology and adaptive tools. Not everybody used these, but we've got quite a good spread there. And here's to round out the demographic side of things. We've got, we are skewed towards more women than men in this study. Otherwise, we have a good spread of ages. And as you can see there, our living and employment situations. That was at the start of the study, so 2 have since become furloughed, as you can see.
Thank you, Tom.
All right.
So
Yeah.
just to kind of put us back into our minds so that we're thinking about the period, because it's not the last 2 weeks. This was from the 17th to the 31st of May. So a couple of weeks ago it finished. So what was happening at that point in time? Well, there was one big news item of that week. It was a couple of days into that week that The Guardian broke the Cummings breach. And that actually has a particular important influence on how people see COVID that I'll mention in a moment. But that kind of takes you back to that, where were we at that point in time? Just a couple of other things. Globally, the caseloads were still going up and deaths across the world. USA had taken over as the leading country, an unfortunate position to be leader of, and Brazil, Russia and the UK were the top 4 countries, and actually they represented 2/3 of the new cases. In the UK at the time, numbers were coming down. I'll show you that in a moment. It was past the peak. Obviously, lockdown was having an impact in terms of contamination and new cases. But it was obviously still a huge focus of everyone's minds and certainly the media attention. In terms of work and economic impacts, the impact in terms of employment had started to kind of feed through into unemployment statistics, which we'll note in a moment. And elsewhere across Europe, it was just at the beginning of the first release of that very strict lockdown. So particularly in places like Spain and France, where people weren't even allowed to leave their properties without specific letters and authority, they were just beginning to ease off. So back to the Cummings issue that popped up that week and how that made people feel and what that meant in terms of lockdown. There was a very interesting study by De Montfort University, a couple of economics lecturers there, where they happened to have asked just before the story broke some questions around, do you believe you follow the government guidance on social distancing and stay at home? And what they did is after the release of the news that Dominic Cummings and had his wife had travelled across the country and visited a historic site as well, they asked people the same questions. And what they found, and apologies, it's slightly poor quality, but you can go to the conversation from the 3rd of June if you'd like to look at it in its original form, that people had changed. So originally it was, they said no, not because they didn't agree with the policy. It was only 4.2% of respondents. This had doubled by a few days after, which was 9%. Although it's a small number, the fact that it's doubled is really statistically relevant. And in terms of had they followed the guidance at all times, that had gone the other way. So that had fallen in that couple of days. So it really did show the government would find it hard, and particularly when we talk about that Europe was beginning to reduce restrictions, to hold to the same level of restrictions beyond it. So it was really the beginning of the pressure for that. And in terms of caseload, we've mentioned that it really was that the peak had passed. There still were a number of new cases, thousands of new cases every week. There still were deaths from that, but that high peak in April had dropped off, and that really was showing actually the impact of the restrictions and containment that had been put in place was working across the community. We're obviously focusing on employment today and work, and you can see this work by this point was very significantly impacted. So from the 3rd to 13th April, just a little bit before this fortnight that we're covering off, but really some really good statistics. By then 26% of disabled people stated their work was affected by COVID-19, and 58% of them were in households where friends or family had work that was affected. So in the community that we're looking at, people with disabilities, a quarter of them by this point had their work affected. And if we look at our cohort, we've got 2 furloughed, and actually all the rest of them that are working age had their work impacted, I think apart from one, to some degree. It was mainly through reduced work as opposed to complete lack of work. So what was coming through the study at this point, and one thing we ask every week and we look for every week, what are the emotions that people are sharing with us, and what are the themes that they're wanting to talk to us about the most? And in terms of emotions, by week 5, happiness had really fallen off. So you can see this kind of trend, week 3, 4, 5, 3 being a bit of a peak there of it falling off. Frustration was still very high. And then, some of the other things like stress and fearfulness, interestingly, had fallen off. So there was some, I think, people getting used to where they were at, but not necessarily very happy about it. In terms of themes, our lovely panel always tells us a lot about the theme that we're asking them specifically for that week. So work became the #1 theme of the week. Health and fitness and communication have remained really high throughout the study, and obviously it is a health crisis, and communication has been a particular challenge for everyone across this period, but specifically for people with access needs. By week 6, this is just looking at the emotions trends. Some interesting things. Sadness has increased this point to the highest point to date. So we can see here there was kind of a real pickup in sadness in this week. And, balancing that happiness was bouncing around, but, had also kind of fallen off its peak in about week 3. So anger was also notable in this week, and I'm wondering whether that was a response to a lot of the media attention of the week before and how people were changing their perspectives of the government handling of the situation. And frustration, stress and fear were all falling, but interestingly along with thankfulness. So some real mixes of emotions as people are kind of more used to where they are, but some of the stresses of having been there for longer feeding through. On to the key themes. Sorry, you get my voice again because I'm taking work, and then Tom will talk you through the entertainment and leisure piece. So in terms of work, some really interesting things that came through. Firstly, very highly varied impacts, and this depended on life stage. So people who were retired were not impacted by work, although they did note that they were very conscious of everyone else being impacted by that. And in fact, one of our retirees really talking to that sense of, it reminded him of periods of downturn that he had been faced with during his work life, and was very conscious of that in the broader community. Work status, so whether people were self-employed or employed by large organisations and small organisations, etc., and how those organisations themselves were being impacted by COVID-19 and the lockdown. And the industries, their own financial security is obviously critical to how that work insecurity will impact them, and their professional role and how adaptable that was to the new environment. Working from home, which has impacted us all, we're obviously all sitting here at home, or most of us are still. It really did require a lot of remote tools and approaches. If you're interested, we spoke to some degree on this in the first session when we were talking about communication. But that finding a place to work in the home, particularly when other people were also working in the home, whether it's a partner and kids doing their homeschooling. There's some interesting balances with no commute. So a lot of people found that they had saved energy from not having to commute in, but then there's also different energies being required in order to engage remotely. So, you know, there's kind of energy in and energy out because of the new work style, and that impacted people in different ways. Professional development has been undertaken by lots of our participants, so a lot of people are kind of using the time to renew their skills and improve their capabilities, so that when they come out of this period, they're really well set up and have some more skills to offer. A number of people are also really thinking about how they can operate in the future and what might be the right place to offer their skills in a way that the market is going to demand even more fully post this period. And there's a lot of uncertainty about the workplace and inclusion specifically post COVID-19. So people thinking about, we've been given this opportunity to work from home for many people with disabilities. That's been a welcome opportunity if they're well set up to do so. How will that continue beyond this period, and how much support will there be for working from home, and particularly inclusive design of that work from home beyond that? And there's some concerns around discrimination we'll talk to later. I won't touch on this too much, but this is just the emotions relating to work. Essentially, as most of them are, it's reasonably balanced. So what's very interesting is people think about both the positive and negative aspects of how this period has impacted their work. And although it's very slightly negative, there are both. But thankfulness, and given that a number of our, you know, we said 2 people are on furlough, no one has actually fully lost their job. So it's more that people have just had reduced work. So people are thankful for the work that they have. There is stress, as you can see, is the third highest as well. So just drilling into a few of these themes, and there's kind of 4 that really kind of came to the fore for me as I was looking through the insights. The first one is obviously working from home, a big theme for us all, but particularly for people with any specific access needs. So having an at-home setup that really suits people, particularly if they're in a very small apartment or sharing with others, as we've mentioned, and particularly for those that have access needs, ensuring that the way in which the organisation is communicating and the way in which they're having to do their work is working for them. Most had time to do the work despite some juggling, so that wasn't really a challenge for this particular cohort. I say a very small cohort, but time wasn't a problem. But that concerns began to start popping up in these 2 weeks around heading back to the office and starting to think forward to when they're expected to head back in, and at what point will they be required to do so, and how well will the workplace be set up for them to do so safely and confidently. In terms of job security, this has impacted 100% of the in-work cohort. Everyone has concerns around their future job security to differing degrees and in differing ways. Some had concern around increasing discrimination in employment. This came from, there's been so many conversations which actually have been very positive around people are impacted differently by the health crisis and how do we support those differences. But a lot of the language around that was around vulnerability. And in the workplace, it's the value that people bring to the workplace, not their vulnerabilities, that they're wanting to really share with their employer. So really ensuring that despite the fact that people do have different needs and different ways in which they bring their abilities to work, that doesn't kind of flip that conversation that's been had over this period to being a risk of increased discrimination. And then people who are self-employed, and there's a higher proportion of people self-employed in the disability community, really noted the challenges of self-employment and the characteristics of it in terms of sick pay, benefits, protections, and so on. And also just having to maintain their own motivation each day. In terms of online tools and team engagement, again, really look to that first session when we talked about communication, because we went into this in quite a lot of detail. But essentially, the collaboration tools that most of us are using, like Zoom that we're using here today, are quite inclusive when designed and used to be so. So today, obviously, we have captioning, but we have a live captioner provided, and it needs to be kind of considered and put on things like Meet. There are AI versions of that as well, but it needs to be considered, and people's additional requirements need to be designed in by the work organisation themselves. Energy is really varying, and we've noted, although there's less travel, that way in which digital conversations can take energy, and again, specifically people who may be deaf and reading captioning all day long, it can become quite exhausting on the eyes and the mind. And also just noting who's talking and so on, is a specific challenge that is not such a challenge in room, in person. Or people who are visually impaired, having to consistently ask people, please, could you describe what's being shared visually if people haven't done so. And actually, equally people who are neurodiverse, managing multiple channels coming in and potentially managing a chat at the same time as the conversation going on and so on. So these energy usage is quite different to in the workplace when it's in place. In terms of the last one, this is the kind of real positive that we're seeing. A lot of people thinking about how do they support the economy as it's moving forward, and where do they bring their skills to bear, and how do they develop their skills during this period, so that firstly it suits the market better as the market is moving quite rapidly, and particularly how do they take skills online for those that may not have done so before, but also really thinking about how does their role suit them personally, and having this point of reflection that lockdown has provided us all. A number of people are kind of reconsidering their career and what they do. Enough hearing from me, let's hear from the participants themselves. And I won't read all of these, but I'm just going to pick a couple of the quotes. So one here from a female participant who's in her 40s and lives with her partner. She said, I live in a one-bed flat with my partner, and I have to say it's really hard trying to work from home with him coming in and out. When I work, I like to be in my own space and really like and just be really focused on it. So concentration, she has ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia. Concentration is really important, and this is a challenging environment for her. One of our deaf participants, who's in his 50s, mentioned he's self-employed, and he said, my working practice has changed in a big way as the majority of it is client-facing and has stopped. This impacted my income because I had BSL talks lined up until September, which are cancelled. When lockdown started, about 80% of my clients had been furloughed. Now it's nearer 100%. Since then, I've been doing remote advocacy work. So it's a really nice quote that really reflects both work changing and people looking to new ways to do so. And one on the positive of how virtual environments can offer different ways to engage with people and be perceived differently is one of our female participants in her 30s. She's a wheelchair user, and she said, I hope some of the things will stay virtual, like the networking sessions. So maybe my wheelchair and my health is not the first topic of conversation. And that's really, there's a social barrier there that people kind of look at her as a wheelchair user and they start the conversation around that as opposed to around who she is. That doesn't happen when she's in a remote environment because they don't see it. And that's kind of leveled that playing field. So they talk to her about her capability and her work and the conversation that they would have otherwise. One here in terms of people have been applying to HMRC, so going on furlough or for people who are self-employed, asking for the self-employment equivalent of that. And we have a blind participant who said, I managed to apply for my self-employment through HMRC to get some money. I thought it was going to be really inaccessible. The only issue is that they wanted the driver's license, passport detail, or bank account. I did have to get sighted help to do that bit. I'm always worried about doing things like that, but obviously if they're going to pay me, I have to do it. This is actually quite a positive story. Although she was very concerned about doing it, she did need sighted help for one part of it. So the journey hadn't been tested end to end, but actually the majority of it had been designed with her access needs. She's a voiceover user in mind. Now, there's another one that I really like from one of our female participants who's got MS, and she's a professional and is currently operating with reduced work hours. And she said, on a serious note, I think disability employment is going to be affected by the recession. Over the last few months, disabled people have been vulnerable people who need protecting, and all the years of work that's been done by activists, etc., in the business community that see people as valuable resources is undermined by that. We may go back to the charity model of disability, and that'll set us back a long way. So that really kind of beautifully summarises that point I was saying before, in terms of it's been important to protect people through this period and recognise people as different to manage the health risks to them. But let's not undermine all the work that's been done to this point in terms of recognising people's abilities and recognising people's values in the workplace. And the fact that they have health conditions doesn't underwrite those values. So just making sure that that period of recognition becomes a positive period, not a negative one for people. A couple of other ones I'll just pick out. The amount of work is dramatically reduced, which is affecting my income. It's not an easy situation for everyone really, but trying to run your own business and maintain confidence and motivation for that can be quite difficult at times. And this comes from someone who runs their own business, and I think it's a really important kind of show of where it's different in different environments with people in different work situations. And actually the one here from someone who's partially sighted, a lady in her 20s who's employed full-time, she said, I've been reading a lot about how the world needs to adapt better to disabled people after the virus, and it's so true. I usually work from home half the week and feel guilty about doing this, but I need it with my eyes. Suddenly the whole world is working from home, and it's fine, which shows it is possible for business. Business just needs to change their mindset. So, you know, let's take these positives that have come through this period and flow them forward so that this works better for everyone, and the benefits that we've gained through this unfortunate period can actually be taken forward with us beyond it. I'm going to jump over these. Please know that there are a wealth of insights here, and please reach back to them after. I'm just going to pick one here again from our deaf participant who's a BSL user, and he said, it impacted me at the beginning, joining remote video conferencing meetings. It was difficult to manage for the interpreter and I. People tend to talk over each other, and it's hard to identify who's talking. In the last 2 weeks, my interpreter and I have adapted to this process by bringing in control, i.e. hands up when someone wants to speak, and the interpreter reminding people not to talk over each other. It's now become as if it's a face-to-face meeting, but remotely. This really shows how over the period of this study, we've seen change, we've seen growth in terms of people's skills and capabilities to work remotely in more efficient ways. Here's just a few images to go with it in terms of how people are engaging in work. Certainly lots of self-learning and engagement with things like the Digital Leaders Virtual, which was running. A lot of this has been free that might have been paid conferences normally. So there's a lot of access for people to do self-improvement or skills development over this period that our cohort has really taken off a lot of value from. A lot of the conversation around less visible differences, some concerns around going back to work and what that might mean. We've talked about the Zoom boom and people actually engaging with Zoom in different ways, whether it's mobile because that's more accessible to them or on their computer. That's work. Tom, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. So here we are, from the world of work to the world of leisure and entertainment. You know, we wanted really to highlight this theme as part of as one of the 6 themes, because obviously how people cope with all these changes, you know, can also factor into what choices and decisions and barriers they face with leisure and entertainment itself. So some key insights that emerged under this theme for us. So we kind of grouped this into solo hobbies and shared pursuits. In terms of people pursuing things individually, so they've started or renewed new hobbies or old hobbies, but renewed them. So such as gardening, sewing, baking, these were all popular. Home and garden, for those who have a garden, is a much needed place to escape to and just get a little bit of mental and physical strength back from. Um, Reading books and, oh, can you not see my video? It is on. Sorry, not sure why that would not be on. Strange. Let me just
No,
see here.
you are. There you go.
Oh,
Sorry.
I am.
It's because
Okay,
I'm in
okay.
presentation mode. I can't see that. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, no, that's important. Sorry, so reading books and listening to podcasts are also very popular ways to pass the time. And then TV streaming and gaming are also being done by panel members. And they've kind of, people have opened up to new, some are actually watching less TV and some more TV, and others are exploring, signing up to new streaming services such as the Disney Channel and downloading new games. As we'll talk about in a second, voice interfaces are popular. Oh, sorry, Christine, can you go back?
Sorry, I jumped by accident. There you go.
Sorry, thanks. And there's a bit of a lag, so I can't see. Here we go. So shared pursuits. So online pubs and quizzes, things like bingo. What's interesting here is what participants have told us is that they're engaging in activities remotely that they would not normally do face to face. So one example is a participant who has dexterity condition who cannot physically fill out a bingo card with pencil and paper. He finds that online bingo is much easier, and for the first time in his life, he's actually enjoying playing bingo with his family. Another example is online choirs, where people with mobility and other considerations find it difficult or fatiguing to actually make their way physically to a choir, or let alone sit or stand in a choir for a length of period of time, are finding online choirs really kind of revolutionary, and they have fallen in love with them. And then some people are taking time outside with kids and dogs if they have them, and partners and so on. There were some garden catch-ups with friends, so kind of that old style of meeting and conversing outside over the fence kind of thing. So as we can see, perhaps unsurprisingly, many people felt happy around their leisure and entertainment. This was one of 2 of the 6 themes where happiness or the positive emotions outweighed the negative ones. So we've had that with food, interestingly, food and essentials, as well as with leisure and entertainment. Okay. Oh, there we go.
It's quite a lag.
Bit of a lag, sorry about that. So we've divided this theme into 4 sections. So in terms of personal hobbies, home and garden, as I mentioned, gardening is big. People are taking advantage of that to really de-stress. They like having meals outside in the garden, and just also it kind of gives a bit of a change of scene from always being cooped up in one place and working from there as well as, and so on. So just going out into the garden. Sewing, crafts are being explored. Cooking, as we know from the food theme a few weeks ago, is always popular. And people have been exploring new ways of doing that. DIY is features as well, so fixing things around the home. People are taking advantage of the spare time that they have and ticking off mundane tasks and so on. So which is great, and in a way they're decluttering and clearing up space, which is a big positive for people, especially those with mobility and other conditions. If we look at shared activities, as I mentioned already, bingo is popular. Quiz nights have actually been popular throughout the diary study. People have enjoyed doing those. And again, now we did notice there that people are exploring new things, but they also have a little bit of trepidation, as Christine mentioned, around whether or not the plug will be pulled, so to speak, on many of these inclusive initiatives, such as, online choir, online bingo, Voiceless choir is a popular one that one of our panel participants really love doing. And, that kind of takes out the pretension of needing to know how to sing. She's just been enjoying. One participant actually said that for 10 years she avoided choir despite really wanting to do so. And now this has actually given her the opportunity to join a choir remotely. And it's like her number one de-stress slash leisure activity that brings about happiness. And she video edits herself singing in the choir, so she's really gotten into it, and it's opened up a whole world for her. And the games and board games are always popular as well. So those factor in, and people are playing also games using voice UIs like Alexa and Amazon Alexa and others. So people are finding new ways to make themselves kind of happy and positive in this period. So as I mentioned, Audible and Alexa are popular voice UIs and highly appreciated, not just by people with mobility dexterity, but also sight conditions and even people who are neurodiverse. So just like laying back and just relaxing and listening to a podcast. As I mentioned, some have invested in streaming services that they wouldn't otherwise do, just to kind of vary things up a little bit. They're downloading games, and they're reading and listening to podcasts and discovering new content out there. And finally, cultural activities from home. Theater is a big one. People noted that they tuned in to the National Theater, which was being put on YouTube. And Streetcar Named Desire was one of the popular shows there. So people are finding ways to replicate museums and theater exhibitions online. Having said that, an important caveat here, or an important addition, interestingly, as all of our panel members are exploring these new remote methods, our oldest panel member, who's in her 80s, is actually not exploring these methods, and she's finding she really misses going to the theater, going to galleries and museums and so on. So she, again, not to generalize on older participants, because some are very tech savvy and early adopters, but it's interesting that this lady who lives alone, she's in her 80s, she feels that she's missing out on museums and theaters, despite them being more and more available. All right, next slide.
Sorry, it's
there we
coming.
go. So so here are just a few quotes. The one in the green from our older lady with multiple sclerosis, she mentions that it's great that disabled people can have access to Globe Theatre online, for example. I've been able to go there previously, but most disabled people do not. So I hope this streaming idea continues. And again, she is also the one in the work section, as Christine noted, that was worried about some of these advances being then pulled back afterwards, after lockdown closes and ends. There's another participant talks about reading an audiobook. Amazon Alexa is great when I'm in bed, and this is a wheelchair user with limited dexterity. And then our older adult here, who's hard of hearing, was saying that he was able to enjoy the British Museum exhibition and really felt as if they were visiting the items while relaxing at home. So with any luck, these trends will actually continue post-lockdown. So it'd be very interesting to see how that continues. Because again, fatigue is a constant theme that we do hear about. So it's exhausting to go in person. Right. So some people are exploring new ways of enjoying, things, escape room, etc. And I think the tuneless choir is always a favorite. I think we're not going to go through each and one of these. So let's go just in the interest of time. As I say, these will be available afterwards for you guys to peruse. Our male participant who's BSL said that, when lockdown started, I realized there were many things that would change. Normally, I'm reactive. I go out. I'm out to cinema, shopping, and so on. I was out of the house a lot, but then I decided this was a good opportunity to catch up on some reading. The lady I mentioned who's in her 80s, she gets 2 newspapers so she can do 2 crosswords. So she's buying more newspapers to fill the time that she has with crosswords. And then again, talking about voice commands being so much easier, people exploring that further and further. Here's some images from of the tuneless choir online, people enjoying their pets. and returning to sewing, crochet, and other kind of things as a hobby.
Sorry, the next one's going.
No problem. Sorry, I still can't see. Oh, there we go. So yeah, again, we have some participants in their gardens, and you can see all the work they've been putting into their gardens lovingly. I mean, they look beautiful. Trying takeaways. Takeaways have become these treats. Once in a while, people say, "Oh yeah, so we've done one takeaway this month." So it's interesting, but it's almost become a treat to have a takeaway meal, and in this for example, on a person's birthday. Virtual gallery tours, pub quizzes, as I mentioned, and of course the ever-present voice UI and audio UIs being popular choices.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
So yes, we've gone from the serious to the fun. Well, hopefully people enjoy their work. We certainly do. But having covered off those two, I'd just like to kind of wrap up this 6 weeks that we've been looking at it. And one of the things that we asked is, as participants came to the end of the 6 week, in the last week, we asked them how they were thinking about lockdown and isolation and the changes that were coming as they looked forward and were moving beyond the kind of mandated requirements that we were moving into at the beginning of the study. And then just a little bit to think about as organisations in what can we do to prepare for the next period, because we're not going back to where we were. We're moving forward, and we're moving forward to an uncertain environment that is still in itself moving quite rapidly. So a little bit to cover off that. In terms of when we asked people about their perspectives of lockdown and how they'd changed across this period of the study, there was a few things that kind of really came to the fore. Firstly, is most people had found a new rhythm. Some people had found that more difficult than others through the period, and you felt that kind of friction, particularly kind of probably mid-study for some people, where they were just not finding their ease in this new environment. And some people, because they were coming from a very extroverted life, having a much more introverted one was more difficult. Some because of their access needs, that there was more friction in this new environment. Others actually kind of went, I've done this before. In fact, one of our participants, sadly the one who had to pull out because of health needs, she said at the beginning, this is just like last year. It's just that everyone's doing it. So it's a little bit easier for me because everything's better set up. She had had a period last year where, due to health reasons, she had had to self-isolate for quite a period. So it really varied across the cohort, their nature and the nature of their needs, and how easy it was to manage those needs within the new restrictions. Despite the rhythm having been found by most people, there was also increased isolation, loneliness, and boredom that was kind of picking up right through the period. And it, like a lot of mental health, it spiked and fell depending on conversations people may have had in a day. And I remember one particular conversation someone shared where they'd had a conversation just go sideways. And this is our gentleman who's a BSL speaker, and he couldn't have the face-to-face conversation where he felt he probably wouldn't have let it go sideways as much, and then that really impacted his mental health for a number of days after. So just that difficulty around communication and not being able to solve things, and feeling if things go a little bit where you don't want them, or for someone else they lost an aunt and they had to deal with a death in lockdown, and it was a really difficult period to deal with things like that happen in our lives normally. It wasn't to do with COVID, it was another condition, but dealing with it while she was separated from her parents and not able to kind of be there with them, and not able to kind of go through the process of mourning in the way they would have liked, was really difficult. So there's kind of this increasing load of being constrained and not able to deal with it, and that did increase isolation, loneliness, and actually boredom as well. For some seem to have just filled every day with 1,000 things, but for some people they were getting increasingly bored. On the flip side of that's gratitude, and I think we had one person who did contract COVID, but by the end of the study he had actually recovered, and recovered quite well. And people were grateful in our cohort, which is to say a very small cohort, but that they hadn't personally been impacted, and they were very grateful for their health. They're also grateful for the small things in life that were there beforehand, but they've really leveraged and valued in this period, whether it's family and friends, whether it's the work that they've got, even if it's reduced work, their gardens, their dog, they're cleaning a room and then feeling lovely about it. These things just were moments of gratitude that felt deeper potentially than they might have before the lockdown. And again, anxiety and fears, and both managing complex health needs. It is difficult in a health crisis to manage complex health needs. Even simple, well, not simple things, but things that would be simple beforehand, like the logistics of repairing a wheelchair, are much more difficult within a lockdown period, and yet critical for someone's mobility and independence. And then the fears for the future, and particularly future work and economic security, but also the mental health fluctuations are really an ongoing challenge for many. This period has impacted as a society, not just people with disabilities, but we know more broadly mental health across the community. And it's continuing to do so. That hasn't gone away. So in terms of what was noted about leaving this period, and when they're looking forward, what are the things that they're really looking to and thinking, how are we going to manage that? Or what are those challenges that we're aware of? Firstly, managing personal health, we've spoken about quite a bit. One particular quote is, "We're not coming out of isolation, any of us." And this was a lady who's got a vision, her main disability is she has sight loss, but actually she's very aware of protecting her health and the health of her family. And she wishes to ensure that they are protected well beyond the regulated lockdown. So lockdown will unlock at very variable rates, depending on individuals, depending on their health, but also just depending on their tendencies and their risk profiles. And then others are already starting to re-enter, but they're cautious in doing so, and it's in their way and at their pace, and in their environments that they're choosing first, the things that are most important to them. The social expectations is an interesting one. So the concern that others will expect them to start to head out for work or for appointments, and that some of the opportunities to not have to put yourself at risk through lockdown might be unwound at a speed that is too fast for people's individual preferences. We do have a lovely positive story about this, though, where one of the women in the cohort, she works in a very, very large organisation, and one of the senior leaders had shown that had stated publicly to the whole organisation that as they open the offices up, there will be no judgment for those who choose not to go back into them, and that this is something that is as people want in the time that suits them. So, this isn't just a negative. There's some really lovely positives from leadership, organisations that are leading the way on this. And then that social distancing can cause, I didn't finish that, sorry, social issues if, people don't wish to go back in there. And this, goes to the next point, which is there's issues if you don't respect space, and if people are coming in too close, and this is particularly as areas get busy again. So if we think about public transport, particularly in places like London or Manchester or bigger cities, and if we think about as the cities and some areas get busy or workplaces get busier, if people don't respect the fact that some people really do want to protect themselves and maintain that social distancing, this is going to be potentially quite difficult for them still. And they're going to have to ask for that space. And if they have to ask for it proactively, they might have a difficult conversation. We've already heard of some experiences people have had where they've had some quite strong pushback from the public when they've asked, could you please keep your space? I'd like to keep my 2 meters. And there's some interesting work I know some of the advocacy organisations are doing around this right now. There's also a problem if they find it hard to maintain space themselves. So people, particularly with sight loss, who can't see where people are around them, and guide dogs and service dogs are not yet trained to know what a 2 meter social distancing is. So if it's difficult for them to maintain that space themselves, it's not just people with sight loss. So people who are hard of hearing or deaf, they can't hear who's behind them, and they might close that space down in a backward way, or move into someone's space not knowing it behind them or outside of their sight lines. And people who have spatial challenges, who just remembering what 2 meters is and remembering how to maintain that, whether it's through memory loss, they just forget that we're in this environment, or just other cognitive challenges that make it difficult for them to maintain that. And we've talked about discrimination a bit, and it's really just in this last 2 weeks we've started to hear quite a lot of interest in discrimination from the cohort and discussion around it. And I think a few things triggered this, positive and negative. There's a lot of positives that have come through this period that people want to hang on to, and people want to make sure we don't lose the positive momentum and the gains that we've had through this very unfortunate period that we've not wanted, but we've got. And in getting it, we've actually adapted in ways that are really quite valuable and can be very valuable going forward. The Black Lives Matter movement has also really highlighted inequality, and that just started to come in at the end of this. And was beginning to kind of pick up momentum in terms of media coverage. And that impact on equality, how may that impact inequality due to disability and diverse abilities? And there's both positive and negatives that people are feeling around that. When we're looking at barriers, once the barriers been made, people are made aware of barriers, things like unconscious bias, then that barrier can be removed for any inequality that sits there, whether it's due to the colour of people's skin, their abilities, their gender, all those elements. So actually this could be a really positive flow-on effect to disability. There's also some concerns that may take attention away from inclusion of people with disabilities. So making sure that we protect what's there and support what's not. And everyone has experienced disability now. And this is a really interesting point, that we've all basically had an enforced mobility impairment through this period of lockdown. And this has probably been the greatest empathy exercise that could have been created globally, not by design, but by requirement. And actually people now know what it's like to not be able to choose to leave their home, and to not be able to choose to have a face-to-face meeting but be required to have it online, not be able to choose to go to the cinema but actually to be able to experience it in different ways. And that this has a really positive potential flow on if we use this empathy and flow it into design and opportunity in the future. So the reset, I found this nice image online. Just to finish up, some thoughts really on how we can take the learnings of this period, and some of the things that when we look at it and sat back and looked at this 6-week period and said, so what? As an organisation, what can we do that we can take from this and play it forward into an uncertain environment, a constantly changing future that we're not yet sure how it's going to play out? What can we learn from this that might be valuable, and hopefully valuable to you in your organisations? Here's a couple. Firstly, obviously, we're an insight agency. We're going to say this, but we believe this to our absolute core. Open the organisation to insight and to listening channels, because anything that we heard, and this is why we did this ourselves, so we do believe our own story here. Anything that we were listening to 6 months ago is now irrelevant. The world has moved on. And so it's really important to open an organisation to new ways to listen to your customers, to your staff, to any other stakeholders, suppliers and so on, to understand the perspective and the challenges that are being created right now for them, and to understand how you can address them. Difference is more important than ever, and it's also more impactful to your brand. So now if you exclude someone, that exclusion may have a very consequential health impact on them if they have to, say, expose themselves to going out in public when they're not wanting to. Also, their experiences are all heightened, and we've really felt this in the way people talk about their experiences, both positive and negative, that because people are in this period of heightened anxiety and heightened restriction, they're also in heightened experience. And when you support them in this moment, oh my gosh, do they appreciate it. And they will remember your brand and be very, very loyal to your brand because you were there at that moment where it counted more. Equally, where you fail someone in a period where the consequences of that failure is higher, they will equally remember that, and that will have above normal impact on their brand perspective and how they share that. Minimising risks and providing options to people. So the mandated period is beginning to unwind. People will come back to organisations in different ways at different times. So just recognising that and designing optionality in for that. Building customer confidence will take really new practices. In fact, I was talking to a lovely lady who works in the I was talking to a lovely lady who works in the airline industry recently, and that's an industry that will really need to proactively rebuild customer confidence, and particularly given, aging customers are a big proportion, the grey nomads, a big proportion of the income that they have. So in different industries, this will really take different practices that weren't there beforehand. Share of wallet is something that is going to impact us all. We're moving into an economic downturn, and it's going to get very hard to retain the share of wallet you have today. And if you're underserving customers today, they will leave, because they are getting more, we're seeing this in our panel, they really are looking at where they're putting their money, where they're spending it, and they're beginning to reduce any discretionary spend that they don't think is vital. If you're not supporting all of their needs or supporting them in a way that suits them, they will probably put that in that discretionary non-vital spend. So, or they'll find someone who does it better. This is a real both risk but also an opportunity to those that are further ahead. Protecting the learnings from this period, we've touched on this quite a lot through today. So really, as we unwind the mandated period, thinking about what did we learn in this period, how do we protect the positives that have come out of it, and then build on it, keep some momentum going so that we keep learning about how we can engage people in a truly omni-channel environment, in truly, in multiple ways that suit people that will have ongoing needs and ongoing preferences to engage with you in ways that might have been created for this period. Then using the increased discrimination awareness from the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's a very visible difference, and it's very different in some ways to disability, which the majority of disability is invisible. But once you're looking through the perspective of race and ethnicity to consider where the barriers are in your organisation to customers or staff or socially, when you expose those barriers, a lot of those barriers actually flow right across the areas of discrimination, the areas of inclusion or exclusion. So address that barrier more broadly so that you get the maximum benefit from that. We're very strong supporters of where there's inappropriate and exclusion, let's address that for whatever reason, whether that is ethnicity, whether that's gender, whether that's sexual preference, or whether that's disability. And really the last piece, the most important one, is we are in an ongoing period of change. So we all need to keep learning and adjusting, us too. So this is just the start of this journey to whatever people are using. We're in this new normal. It's not normal. We're in this new period, and it's a period of increased rate of change. And that's going to require increased rate of response and adaptation from all of us, individually and as organisations. So all we can do is wish you all the best with that. Please reach out to us if we can help in any way. And I know that we're right on time, but please, if there's any questions, Tom and I are still here and can be here to respond to all your questions, or you can please reach out to us at any point. Here are our contact details. Over to you. Please unmute yourself if you have any questions, and you can just ask them directly to us.
Hi, Christine. It's Sandra here from Sainsbury's. Hi again. So thanks for the session. It was fantastic, very interesting. Thanks for all the hard work that you and Tom have put in. Yeah, I didn't make the first two sessions, but I'm really interested in the one that included food and basics. Obviously, from a Sainsbury's and Argos point of view, we've learned a lot and have had to react very quickly to our customer needs over this period. So it would be really good to hear what your cohort had to say in that space. But yeah, just thank you for today and all the effort you put in. No specific questions as such.
Absolute pleasure, Sandra. Just a quick note to all of you, the previous two presentations, if you go to our blog on openinclusion.com, /blog, you'll find the link to the previous two presentations, the videos of them. But also, if anyone would like to speak specifically about an industry, and Sandra, we're very aware, Sainsbury's particularly, more so again than Argos, because you got hit so hard with massive change at the beginning of this period. you know, we're working very hard to try and adapt rapidly to it. So if you do want to have some specific insights to your industry, please reach out. I'm more than happy to come in and do a session with you around particularly, you know, getting food and basics. We actually had a huge amount of insight on that, a small amount of which we shared in that first session, but actually we probably have 4 or 5 times as much that we couldn't share. And obviously it picked up quite a lot since, because that was at week 2. So we've got 4 more weeks of insight since.
Sure, okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No?
No, guess not.
Well, I'll just say thank you to everyone. Thank you particularly to those that have come along the journey with us and seen, you know, we've all been on this journey of learning and opening our eyes to how is this impacting people. You know, recognising the limited scale of this particular survey, we had to go fairly narrow because we wanted to go very deep and we really wanted to understand how things were changing. So by picking a longitudinal approach and having a daily study, we just couldn't manage it wider. So it's given us a fabulous insight. A few places you can go look outside of this to get a broader feel. I know RIDC, we're very collaborative rather than competitive. I know they've done 3 different snapshots that were a lot broader, but snapshots across the period. So go and have a look at what they've been sharing. The BDF, the Business Disability Forum, has done, you know, put a lot of materials out in terms of how organisations can adapt in the post-COVID world, particularly actually when we're talking about communication in the workplace. There's some fabulous materials there. Please reach into there. The ONS has shared some really good statistics on disability just recently. I think it was 2 weeks ago. In fact, some of the stats we put in today. But you know, keep learning, learn from, you know, please reach into us if we can help you in any way. But this is a period of really, we keep using the word unprecedented change. So it is going to take some thinking to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind and we don't accidentally exclude people in a way that has quite profound implications. So over to you guys and all the best. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.